I am the moderator tonight, and we're going to explore how university leadership adapts to global change, reconciles academic and business priorities, and shapes the future of higher education. Just a small topic there. So I am Cambridge's 347th Vice-Chancellor, but I am only the 6th full-time Vice-Chancellor. The first full-time Vice-Chancellor was David Williams, who's no longer with us. He was the one who converted from a 2-year head of house, doing it off the side of his desk, to a full-time Vice-Chancellor. And you've got the rest of us here. This is it. This is the total set of full-time Vice-Chancellors. After David was Alec, after Alec was Alison, after Alison was Boris, after Boris, Stephen, and then me. So you've got us all here tonight, and you'll have an opportunity to ask us questions at the end. But first, we're going to have a conversation here, which I will moderate. And we're going to ask just a few questions. I'm going to start the first question about leadership in a changing world. So the question is, and I'm going to invite somebody to start the answers, but then other vice-chancellors can chime in. Question here is, from policy changes to global events like economic downturns and the recent pandemic, which is not so recent anymore, response to external pressures have always challenged university leadership. Which moments stand out from your tenure, and how did you respond? And to kick us off tonight, I'm going to ask Stephen Toop to respond to that question. Stephen.
Thanks, Debbie. Look, I have to say that it would be crazy not to use the example of COVID. It was an absolutely overwhelming set of challenges for the university. But the reason I want to emphasize it was because it was also, I think, a time of tremendous success and tremendous unity within the university. We had been trying for quite a few years, for example, to have lectures recorded. And there was a certain degree of interest, but a certain degree of resistance amongst various faculty members. And then when COVID happened, essentially overnight, it all changed. And everyone agreed that they had to record their lectures, and we had to get the IT departments to provide all of the appropriate facilities, et cetera, which was really quite remarkable. And it all happened within about 2.5 weeks. Not perfectly at first, and it got better, but the willingness of people to just step up and make things happen when they had to was really wonderful. And the other thing I'll say about it was a marvelous moment of collaboration with the wider community, and particularly with the health system. I was on calls almost every single day with the leadership of the health system within the region, the heads of the hospitals. I was also on a national group with the then Minister for universities to try to coordinate activities across the country. And again, people really stepped up. And there was a sense of common purpose and a deep desire, especially to make the experience of students as positive as it could be given the circumstances.
So are we allowed to ask you questions?
No.
Yes. Because I mean,
you're already out of order.
I'm going to, anyway, whatever. So listening to you, Stephen, that's really interesting. Do you coming in after Stephen kind of feel that the good things that came from this, do they continue on now?
No, of course not. They didn't last at all. But what I do experience a lot is a nostalgia for that day in Cambridge, which is extraordinary because I spent the pandemic in Princeton, New Jersey, and there is no nostalgia for COVID, whereas there is a genuine nostalgia for COVID at Cambridge, because it was a time of coming together, and coming together is so hard at Cambridge that people really, they still talk about it as an amazing time when we could get things done, and why can't we do that now? Isn't that funny? Any other vice-chancellors want to contribute moments from your own tenure that stand out in terms of, your leadership challenges?
Well, during my time, the biggest challenge came very, very early on, and that was the first introduction of fees for students.
Oh, wow, yeah.
This was complete novelty, a big volte-face and a change by the coalition government at the time to start really ratcheting up fees in a big way. And of course, what they did was they were prepared to go for fees, but of course then bottled the idea of not actually going far enough,
right,
nor to secure them against inflation. So what they did was to build up a problem that is now rampant through the UK university system and does affect Cambridge as most other institutions. And it was tough because deep down I had a lot of sympathy with where the students stood on this issue, and yet it was very difficult because you really could not conceivably take the government on this particular agenda. They had already sunk a lot of political capital in forcing the fees through. And the alternatives were that we were going to be subjected to severe cuts in the budget of universities. So the option was this was the only way you were going to get any resource. So you were bent over a barrel, even though all your sympathies were actually with the students who were genuinely complaining and had never made provision, nor had their parents ever made provision, because there'd been no talk about this at all.
So this is so interesting. This is my issue. This isn't your issue. The fees. I thought that was kind of something that I did. But you think it's something you did. We all did it anyway. So here's my version of it, Boris. That Cambridge didn't. It was kind of an emperor with no clothes. So you needed some income. I actually happen to believe that students should contribute to their education insofar as they could, because it's an enormous privilege. That's being too many years at Yale that you come to believe those things. But I also believe very deeply in the idea of needs-blind admission and needs-based financial aid. The problem is that in the UK, you were considered financially independent of your parents when you're 18 years old, which is, of course, a complete lie, but that's what you kind of are basing. So we developed this kind of needs-based, needs-blind financial aid system. But I thought we had it all fixed.
No,
now you're telling me that it wasn't fixed at all.
No, not fixed at all.
Okay.
The problem was it was manageable at £1,000 or £1,300, which came in at that time. It was suddenly ratcheted up to £4,500, £5,000. There's no way the financial provision of the university could manage it. And that's where the tensions really brought in. So while it was possible to get that first bit over the line, on the principles you say, but not before.
When it
was,
got to you?
well, £9,000 pounds. And again, though, I'm going to sound like the Pollyanna in the group here. I was also very impressed with how people stepped up. Many people in this room, I have to say, but many across the world stepped up when we launched a whole program to increase the support for students. The Student Support Initiative, which you concluded, thank you very much, was really a profound opportunity to say we're now in a different world, and we have to, as an institution, and our alumni and supporters have to step up and make life possible for the wonderful students of Cambridge, and they did.
But an overall problem that Cambridge always has and still has, our success in many ways is resented, and the government is always trying to get at us. I mean, I wasn't Vice-Chancellor for 3 months until Tessa Blackstone, who was the Minister for Education and Employment, came at the universities and said she was going to take the fee that colleges received away. And so we had to get moving very quickly. Unfortunately, the bursar of St. John's, who was a chap called George Reed, who's still around, had tentacles out amongst the senior tutors, and they gathered this sort of endless pile of evidence that showed the huge benefits of a collegiate university. And then we went back to David Blunkett who I happen to know, is another extraordinary minister, a man who's blind from birth and yet one of the most effective ministers in the Labour government. And we dumped all this on him, and he turned to Tessa Blackstone and said, forget it, we'll leave the college fees there. But, you know, they come back again and again, and of course we could never do well enough in getting state students, if you remember, this endless barrage. But I think the university again pulled together in these issues.
Oh, yes.
And then it all works, you know, and so it's one of the great things about Cambridge, this mixture of English literature experts and lawyers and boring engineers like me and stellar scientists and people, you know, and it all works.
So when I became Vice-Chancellor in 2003, 55% of students were admitted from state schools, but 91% of students in the UK were educated in state schools. So it was a huge gap, which you can attribute either to kind of class prejudice or to the fact that students in state schools weren't getting as good an education. But it was clearly ripe grounds for attacks on us as an elitist as an elitist institution like Oxford, but thanks to huge efforts of the colleges and the university, I would say, but particularly the colleges, that number has changed. There's been a lot done, and for the good.
Now it's about 76% state schools, so it's changed a lot. It absolutely has.
One thing, if I can pick up from Alex's part, I'm impressed that you had someone in government to talk to.
Yeah.
That was lucky. I had Boris Johnson. I just want to be really clear. And that was...
He wasn't picking up the phone, eh?
He was not picking up the phone. And to the point that you made, I'm joking a bit about the Prime Minister, but generally across the government, there was no particular interest in data or arguments that were based in facts. It was really a surprising element for me coming from outside the United Kingdom. I did not expect that to be how I would have to interact with the government.
Okay, well, so let's...
On my watch, the government was very interested. Charles Clarke, Johnson. I mean, they were. What about?
They'd lost it by
They'd
now.
lost it. Well, maybe you're just not as interesting, Boris. Oh, come on.
So
Quite possible, but of course Cameron had just lost all interest in this as an agenda item.
I was told that as moderator I was going to have trouble controlling. So let's, while we're on government, let's go on to the next question, because it does actually, it picks up sort of from there. So universities are now asked to play key roles in global innovation and problem-solving ecosystems by the government and others, while at the same time doing more with less as funding streams for higher education narrow. How did you position our institution within this kind of landscape, this emerging landscape, and what lessons might we carry forward for that? Alex, do you want to begin?
Well, I think over the years, the university's had to adapt itself in a number of ways. And of course, one of the key ways is, of course, in fundraising. And I'm looking at 3 superb fundraisers here. In my day, there were still quite a few dons who thought it was a behavior in very bad taste to ask anybody for money, and that legacy gifts were quite sufficient. And surely we don't want anything else. But that all ended about the same time as Sir William Wass, who headed up a syndicate that decided that the structure of the university wasn't as it should be, and that the very nature of the Vice-Chancellors that had been around for 405 years would have to be changed. Because up until that period, there was always a head of house who was Vice-Chancellor for 2 years. And the Wass Committee proposed that it would be better if the Vice-Chancellor were full-time, did not have a single college, but represented all of the colleges, and that his term or her term should be 5 years. In my case, I always used to think it was 5 years, extendable to 7 for bad behavior. And there was a vote of the Regent House on this, the Regent House being the gathered academics. There were 4,500 in those days, that passed by a fairly narrow margin that this was a good idea. So the likes of David Williams, when he took it over, and I took it over, we knew damn well that were 30 or 40% of the dons out there who thought we were a bad idea. But it did allow, at that time, coordination. And one thing that was immediately realized by David Williams and others, that we really, as a university, weren't effective in fundraising as a university. The colleges did very well individually. The university had received money. John D. Rockefeller gave Cambridge a great deal of money in the 20s for science. But that was rare, and there was no committee doing it. There was a committee formed in 1990. I happened to be a member of it because they thought they'd like somebody from industry, and I'd been in industry here for the IBM for 20 years. A lot regretted the decision afterwards. But when I became Vice-Chancellor, that's what we tried to do immediately. But all that through the 90s, the American Friends of Cambridge University had moved that way quite a bit, very effectively, and they were a very nice group, and I remember meeting them all in New York. Some of you still here now, and we slowly then, in the about 90, official body was set up in Cambridge, and then another official body, and a 501c3 was founded, I believe, in 90 or 92 in the early days. And KUDOS was formed, the Cambridge University Development Office of the United States. But when I arrived, and having lived in America, I was quite a bit jealous of Oxford. Never say that, but because they had quite a few people who were well known, you know, such as Bill Bradley and Bill Clinton and all sorts of others who were very famous, and I thought we must do something about that. But to cut off this little story and leave it for Alison and others to take forward, but we decided we'd bring KUDOS and the American Friends together. And there were so many, in particular, of course, Gurney Hart, who helped do that, and so we formed CAM, and he chaired that, and we got the committee going, and then we were sort of free to run, so we ran over to Seattle and places and got the Bill Gates Scholarship Scheme, and we got Gordon Moore to build the math library, and the whole thing just sort of, but it was all a lot of you here who made that happen. And that was just a brilliant move. And then you also helped persuade the dons that they were in the Stone Age with their opinions about not asking people for money. You just go out and offer these people the privilege of giving Cambridge some money. So it all worked out very well, and I think CAM was just a brilliant thing to start.
Can I just pick up on...
You may.
But parenthetically, what Alec hasn't said is that when I arrived as Vice-Chancellor, there was Alec's blood on the walls because he had fought and achieved governance reforms which just made my life so much easier and those of our successors, you know, an eternal salute. And it was not easy, and Whitehall and the government was in conniptions, but he did good. Anyway, just wanted to say that,
Alec.
Thank you for that, Alison. No, but it's
really,
really true.
I was immensely grateful to you because you just built upon all of that. And
well,
I do remember
indeed.
the other place that I didn't mention before had a bit of a problem at one stage because the succession of vice-chancellors got out of sync. And one undid something I didn't say it. Yeah, we adore Oxford, of course, because when you can't get Cambridge to do anything, you have to find somebody in Oxford saying, well, we're doing it.
Yeah, and then...
But
just coming back to kind of Cambridge and America, so I've been at Yale all these years. We're running, everybody's hungry. How many stories can one tell at an occasion? So one sort of So a lunch in my first year as Vice-Chancellor at Chevening with all of these alumni, and I'm floating the idea of a £1 billion campaign, which nobody had ever imagined. And there were three objections. One is the problem of the colleges. I said, what do you mean? It's the genius of Cambridge. Being big and small at the same time will work together. All tubs will rise. Right. You know, you'll never do it until you preferentially admit the children of alumni and donors. Well, that's not even up for discussion. We're not going to do it. And somebody says, wear it as a badge of honor, Vice-Chancellor. But the third objection, which will mostly appeal to you and which is relevant to CAM, is somebody saying, Vice-Chancellor, you've lived in America for too long. You don't understand. Americans have a gene for generosity, but we Brits have a gene for meanness, right? to which I said, but nobody's ever asked properly. So anyway, so I float this idea, and I get a campaign advisory committee in the UK at Cambridge, a British one, and I say, how about a £1 billion campaign? And they all say, oh, great, great. And then I come to New York. I've never forgotten this, and I'm eternally grateful to the CAM board in Cambridge, and I floated this idea, and they looked at me and they said, you must be out of your mind, right? I mean, they were just horrified because they owned the number. The CAM board owned the number, they took responsibility for it, and they had absolutely no belief that we could raise those monies. So then we showed that we had actually gone through it very seriously, and they slowly came on board. The British, campaign planning committee, they didn't own the number. It was a different, it was a complete, it's just exactly more of what you're saying. But that's all changed. And I just now I am this washed up long ago former Vice-Chancellor who gets to join the CAM board, right, which is a huge privilege. And I was just saying to one of you, well, I didn't say it to you, Gabrielle, but I meant to send you an email yesterday to say that I had just read the board papers and I am blown away by their professionalism, their ambition. It's just great. So, thank you.
Okay, so Alison says you're hungry. We'll move to question 3. Question 3 is on governance, growth, and regional responsibility. So the question is this. Institutional governance reforms often leave lasting legacies. During your time in office, did you think about and act on Cambridge's global, national, and regional responsibilities? And if so, how? And I'm going to ask Boris to respond to that.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think it's now the perpetual challenge that we face. Let's be realistic. Cambridge is actually quite a small institution, and what we do is we punch so much above our weight. The tragedy is that we are all absolutely committed, the colleges and the university, to the education program. Of course, that is not what defines the standing of a university, which is, I'm afraid, through league tables, which I've already made so many statements about my opposition to them, but it's actually the research standing that will define the universities of the future. It's nothing to do with which is more important, it's actually just which is easier to measure. And that produces real challenges. The Chinese universities and Asian universities are now pouring huge amounts of state money into infrastructure and into building up their research capacity on a scale that it's actually very difficult to even conceptualize. So the engagement during my time was to start trying to expand as far as we could into areas in the Far East in particular. And one of the most difficult decisions was to actually downgrade our interactions with China and to increase our interactions with India, on the basis that this was going to be a 20 to 25 year commitment before we actually saw the real benefit of where India was. But its population would overtake. It is actually a country that does speak English, does still have a rather interesting perspective of the Raj and colonialism. But at the end of the day, if you have two countries that can understand cricket and all its niceties, then you've got something going for you. So those challenges are going to be even more intense, and it's something we can't avoid. And this is where philanthropy really matters. So during my time, picking up from Alison on the importance of the CAM board, was during my time there's something else, two things happened with CAM. One of it was that then challenging from the 1 billion campaign to start the 2 billion campaign, which Stephen, you brought to a conclusion, was a huge leap. And getting the university to now understand the whole hog, we were going to bring in American staff into Cambridge to actually be able to run QDAR in an American way. So that was the influence of the CAM board. And yet again, challenged the CAM board with twice the requirement. It was a deep intake of breath, I do recall, but they went for it again. But more importantly, what CAM has not just done is to bring up the funding and the opportunities that are now essential for Cambridge to be able to compete internationally. What they also did was to start helping to set up collaborations with major institutions, and in my case, particularly on the West Coast, which had been quite difficult to achieve. I'll give you just one more aside, if I may.
Sure.
Imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I now sit on the Imperial Council at Imperial College London, and guess what they want to do? They want to have an Imperial CAM equivalent, because they've actually seen you're so successful that they are desperate that their alumni start playing their part in supporting Imperial College as well. So please take that as the hugest compliment and flattery of what you've achieved for Cambridge. Now other UK institutions want to copy as well.
If I can pick up on a couple of points, turns out to be prescient to look to India as opposed to China, because now, as you all know, we have these really serious issues with research security, and it's actually become harder and harder. And I worry about that, I'll be honest, about the future of international collaboration, because China is so important and is so full of talent, but it's actually almost impossible to work with China now. So India is a better option. I can't resist also telling a CAM story, because I think it's important to say it's not just about money. It really isn't. I want to be really clear on this. One of the most exciting moments of my vice-chancellorship, some of you were at the meeting that I'm going to describe. We came here with a whole delegation from our student operation. And the former Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Students, Graham Virgo, was leading the charge. We were coming to talk about the foundation year that we wanted to create, and also to talk about student mental health issues and these sets of things that we were really excited that we were driving forward at Cambridge, and we thought people here and CAM and more broadly across the United States would be really interested. Well, not only were they interested, the response was, "You're not doing enough. Like, bold, be much bolder." So we were actually challenged by CAM in substance to do a better job on student mental health and to have a much more ambitious foundation year. And we walked away actually so energized by this. I will never forget it. I remember talking to Graham after that meeting and saying, you know what? We just got a sort of supercharge to go and do something that we thought was the right thing to do, but now we can do it even more, and many of you people have helped make that happen ever since then. So thank you.
Hooray for CAM.
But they've also done something else that was personally absolutely wonderful. There are not many organizations that can fulfill a Vice-Chancellor's dream. Now, many of you will know me, and I do love motor cars, I'm afraid. Sorry, not maybe politically correct. But thanks to CAM, I was able to be taken for a drive on Route 66 in a red Ferrari. And that, I'm afraid, did fulfill a lifetime ambition of this Vice-Chancellor.
So can I tell you, I mean, you were talking about what a wonderful moment. Because I thought you were going to ask us what our worst moment as Vice-Chancellor was. And I was thinking about, can I tell you about my worst moment? Because it's very pertinent to fundraising. So when we launched the 800th, I won't if...
No, please.
So we launched the 800th campaign in Hong Kong, and unbeknownst to me, Lee Kuan Yew was invited because he was an alum of Trinity, but I knew that he had been very badly treated as an undergraduate and had a very unhappy time at Trinity. But anyway, that he'd been invited, so there he is. He's sitting next to me. He speaks before me at the big launch of all of the glittering and rich folk of Hong Kong that we were trying to impress. And he stood up and he read an MIT undergraduate admissions letter, which is long. The first page was telling the student that they were the best thing since sliced bread was invented. And the second page was that MIT was the best thing since sliced bread was invented. So he read all of that. Then he read a Yale undergraduate admissions letter, which said the same thing at length. Then he read a Cambridge College undergraduate admissions letter, which said, "We write to inform you that you have a place in college. Please inform us when your financial arrangements are confirmed, and we will confirm your admission." And then he went on to excoriate Cambridge. It was dire. And then he sat down beside me and he smiled at me and he said, "Vice-Chancellor, I admire you, but nobody is with you." In Cambridge. And then I had to stand up and speak. Anyway, so, which I did. So then after the whole evening broke up, there were no small number of college tutors, senior tutors at this event. And I was kind of walking around saying to them, "You have to fix your admissions letter." And I remember one of them looking at me and saying, "Vice-Chancellor, I would rather commit suicide than change my admissions letter." So kind of some things they take a long time to kind of work their way through the system. But anyway, to me, kind of somehow, CAM has been this heroic presence on one side of the Atlantic, and then what is now CUDA, a differently but also heroic presence on the other side of the Atlantic. And look where we've got.
Alison, there's a corollary to your story, which was shortly after I took up office from you.
You will get your main course eventually.
I met with Lee Kuan Yew, who then appointed me to his group of advisors, and he turned round to me and finally said, "You see, even I can forgive Cambridge."
Yes, I mean, he had deep hostile feelings.
Deep hostility to
I
Cambridge.
could predate that, so I won't predate it. I just want to, we're about to change. I want to bring us back to something that I think is very serious, and that is that universities really have to face the new world of communication and the internet, and we've got to somehow stick together across the world because we've got some extraordinarily bad forces alive and well. And I think we've got to keep up communications everywhere. One thing I did last week was to chair in Cambridge the Cambridge China Executive Leadership Program, which is that eccentric program that's run by Peter Nolan. Yeah. And 30 of the penultimate leaders in China come to Cambridge for 3 weeks. And they hear from the CEOs of the top FTSE 100, the chief people of Boeing and Shell and Coca-Cola and Unilever and all these people, talk to them. And the British press is after us on that. They think we're a bunch of British academics who've got our snout in the China trough. It's absolutely not true because these things are all pro bono. But somehow the world's universities have got to stop some of the things that are going on at the moment. And that, the United States is not without its problems. And so I think the CAM board, like everybody, I think, has to bear this in mind. And international collaboration should be the story.
Yes.
Everywhere. The idea that anybody in a university isn't allowed to collaborate with another academic somewhere in the world is to be stamped out.
Yes.
Okay,
and
so
we can keep money out of it if we can, but it's something I think we've all got to bear in mind.
So with that,
Yeah.
we have promised you the right to ask a couple of questions. I'm going to keep it very short. We're going to take 2 questions. Who will ask the 2 questions from the audience?
This is.
People are too hungry.
It will be whoever gets the mic. If a mic falls into your hand, ask a question.
Okay, so I did my PhD in international relations at Cambridge. I did a master's as well. I was a chief scholar. We were taught as European and British political scientists that Americans count everything. So this is my question. What is one thing that delights you, one thing that appalls you, and one thing you would do if you had your job again today?
Oh my God, just a small question. You can decide whether you are delighted, appalled, or would do again. So the question is, what delighted you, appalled you, and what would you do again if you had your job today?
Delighted and appalled.
Well, either delighted or appalled, I think. Is there anything that stands out?
Okay, delighted. What delighted me was the interrelationship with the colleges. Oddly enough, that is the one thing that you're always accused as Vice-Chancellor at Cambridge of how on earth can you work with 31 other leaders?
Very true.
And actually it's complete and utter nonsense. You turn this around to politicians and you actually have to say, do you know what? Another university may have 1 Vice-Chancellor speaking. We have 32 people speaking on behalf of the university because we're completely joined in the activities that we're engaged in. And that is the strength of the collegiate structure, both in Oxford and Cambridge. What appalls me is inconsistencies rather than areas that come from external forces, and by that I actually usually mean government, is that there is no consistency in the policy. When you look at the successes, for instance, in Singapore, it is based around an absolutely consistent policy that whatever happens, about 1.5% of GDP is going to be dedicated towards the universities. And we do not have that constancy either this side of the pond or the other side of the pond, or for that matter in Europe. China does. And that is what really appalls me for the future, that we don't have that consistency that allows us to remain where we rightly belong, right at the top of the university tree.
Stephen?
Just to pick up on that, I'll start with appalled. And it's a very bizarre phenomenon, which is that for a lot of governments, and not just in the UK, universities are seen as a problem to be fixed, when in fact, I think they are just a tremendous asset for any society. And it was a constant challenge to resist the idea that the university was really not actually there for the country and there for the society, which I think empirically it just is. So that appalls me. One thing that just used to delight me was presenting awards to students who had taken up opportunities to work in the community. We had a sort of social justice organization at the university that supported them in that work. And I always remember every year giving the awards to those students. And they were people who were so passionate about their ability to make a difference in the world because of their Cambridge education. It was so inspiring every year.
So one last question.
So,
Then let it move on. That's right.
Hi, my name's Stephanie Posner. I studied at Jesus. I studied classics, had a fantastic time. I was surprised to learn this evening that so many of the Vice-Chancellors do have a connection to America, have either lived here for some period or spent quite a bit of time here. And my question is just how you feel that impacted your, how you approach the role and the job of Vice-Chancellor, if it did at all.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So the question is, many of us on the panel spent time in America or in North America. How do we think it impacted our time as Vice Chancellor? The American example, if you will.
What do you think? For me, it was that I had worked in the IBM research labs in New York for 20 years. And I was very much aware of where we were in that lab. And we competed with Bell Labs all the time. And I was very aware of what was needed to advance modern technology. And one of my first missions was to try to wake up some of the industry in the United Kingdom to what was really needed. And that the way it influenced me was I could see the excellence of the science in Cambridge. But I could also see that much of that science was a gift to the world, but not necessarily to the United Kingdom. And that was always a bit of an issue. And it became a sort of political issue in Britain too, because if I wanted to be appalled, I was appalled by the lack of constructive action from the City of London to support real innovation and change.
So I mean, this is very interesting. But we have to stop and eat. But what I would say, Alec, is that I was educated in Cambridge, and then I came to Yale as a 24-year-old assistant professor, where I taught. And kind of, and then going back to Cambridge, what was kind of so clear is that what the United States imagines that you do with a bright 18-year-old is utterly different from what the United Kingdom thinks that you should do with a very bright 18-year-old. And nobody talks about that. But actually, a conversation got going. I mean, maybe the ideal education system hovers somewhere over the mid-Atlantic, or maybe it's actually that students learn in different ways, and that what you need is a bit of flexibility in both systems, so that a really bright Cambridge student who's crafty can manage to make an undergraduate education that looks something like a liberal arts and sciences education, and a really bright Yaley can create a special major that looks something like a Cambridge undergraduate degree. But it just still stuns me how different these educational systems are, and that you all come out as these incredibly bright students, well-educated students. Anyway, that's my kind of transatlantic piece.
I think my role was to make it possible to appoint an American as the Vice Chancellor of And I actually mean that, because as a Canadian, I think I was a test case for someone from North America who had sort of the North American or US sensibilities, but was perhaps a little bit safer and calmer. And I, of course, had been to Cambridge, so that was also important. But I really do think that was my principal role.
So
it's great.
As the one Vice Chancellor who hasn't spent time in the United States for any long period of time, what was really important was the understanding that the United Kingdom university system and the American system are absolutely founded on the principles established by Humboldt in Berlin in 1812, in that there is a passionate belief that the student and the tutor and the individual lecturer walk together through advancement of knowledge, which runs counter to 90% of continental Europe, where there is a divide between the educational aspects of European universities and the research aspects, which still are largely institute focused. And that difference is a fundamental difference which brings UK and US universities together and allows us to have a brilliant US Vice-Chancellor.
Very quick.
All right, and with that, let's eat. Please join me in thanking the panel.